always been weird to me about religion, and I don't care where on the planet you live. This has always been a strange one to me, is how all of us think that we joined the right church, the right God, and the other guy has it wrong. I find that fascinating. And you realize, think about this, Eric. The reason you went to the church you went to is because of your parents. They got up one day and took Eric to a temple. I got up one day, they took me to a Protestant church, and then forever on, that's what I believed. So it's just weird though how we all think that the other person's God is made up, but I've got it right.
It's just more evidence that it's false. It's actually evidence against. I'm not saying there's a God or not. I have no idea, but he definitely is. If he or she exists, he or she must not be an intervening God. He or she must not be setting up religion. Because to do so would be to exclude almost all of his or her children, if that's what we are, from salvation, really. Because if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you think there's only going to be 100,000 people that make it into heaven. If you're even within your own organization, you only think 100,000 of you are going to make it. As Mormons, we think only good Mormons will make it. As Catholics, whatever. My dad and I argue all the time about this stuff. And I tell my dad, Dad, do you think that any other church other than Mormonism has it right? And he'll say, of course, well, no. If they had it right, they would be the same church, because every church is different because it has its own doctrine. Obviously, if it had the same doctrine as another church, it would be that church as well. So on its face, there can, in my dad's mind, and in anyone who goes to church, just their church has it right. So I say to my dad, well, let's not argue. We're so much more in agreement than we're not. You think every single church in the whole world is wrong except for one. I just think that every single church in the whole world is wrong, and that one too. It's not that big of a difference. I mean, we really agree, really almost entirely. Let's just agree that I just took it one church further than you did. You're throwing out thousands and thousands of churches. I'm throwing out thousands and thousands in one. So can we get along? We can't get along. My dad and I mean, he's very staunch in the church. And actually, I don't want him to not be a Mormon. He's 62. I was 31 when I woke up. It was traumatizing. I can't imagine investing twice that amount of time in life and then waking up to can you imagine you've been lied to for 30 years and then you figure it out? How much worse would it be at 62 to then figure it out? I mean, just let him, not to go back to the Matrix, but Morpheus says to Neo, I apologize to you. We have a rule. We never wake a mind when it reaches a certain age because it's too difficult on that mind.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think even if you have doubts as you get older, I think you reach a point where, and I think this is true about all religions, you don't want to admit that you could have been lied to or this doesn't make sense. I think you get to a point that you just go along with it because, that's hard, facing yourself in the mirror and going, gosh, all that time I spent at the church or at the synagogue or wherever it might be, it was all made up. It's hard to admit that. It's hard to face that.
One of the hardest things that I've ever done was I kept a friend from my mission to Quebec. And I'm actually going to go see him in a week or two. I'm driving up there with the kids in my van, and we're going to go up there and see him. But we stayed in good touch, and then I stopped taking his calls. When I stopped believing, I stopped taking his calls because my missionary companion at the time, the other missionary that I lived with and worked with, my colleague, he actually baptized him into the church, and he's still a member and still believing. And it was very, very hard for me to talk with him because when he would talk, he'd bring up God and religion and a way of life that is now foreign to me. And I didn't want him to see that I had fallen away because in some part, I was one that helped teach him to be a Mormon, and my companion baptized him. And when I finally had to tell him that I've fallen away and that I'm not a believer in that anymore, it was very, very difficult. And I was afraid of what that would mean to him because, like you say, wow, I mean, to go look in the mirror and say I've been wrong this whole time, it's even worse when you go to somebody you helped to bring in. And now you got to go to that person and say, I was wrong this whole time. I lied. I didn't lie. I didn't know I was wrong. But I've been lied to, and I propagated lies. And now I brought you in, and now I'm going to tell you that you've been a member of something for 15 years or whatever it's been since I was a missionary that I think is not true. And I helped bring you into it. I mean, it was a very tough conversation. He took it very graciously and very well and didn't care. he's happy being Mormon and I'm happy not, and we're still going to hang out, and I'm happy about that. But it was tough. Yeah, what you're saying is true.
I think there's, I don't know, in the Mormon Church, there's got to be a high percentage of people that are just going through the motions, but they really don't believe all this. I have to think that.
Well, the church claims somewhere around 15 million members. If you look at actual attendance records, only about half actually go to church. Of those, I would say probably about half are not really even believing, but are going along with it for ulterior reasons, whether it be social, whether it be community, whether it be financial support, whether it be something. They're trying to get something from the church, or the pain and trouble of moving away from it is too great, so they just keep going. They want to disappoint their friends and family or whatever. So I think the church touts 15 million members. I'd be amazed if more than a handful of few million have their heart in it. I was one of them that did. I would have taken a bullet for the prophet. I would have done anything I was told. I was a good little soldier, and I was ready to get my celestial glory if I died in the service of God. And it's a good thing the Mormon Church isn't militant or doesn't have, extremist views like, holy war or whatever, because the fact that Mormonism doesn't ascribe to any of that, you can be a militant Mormon and you really don't pose a threat to anybody. You just are kind of always depressed and self-loathing and never feeling good enough. The more you believe, the worse you feel, I think. Where in other religions, you can be made to believe that maybe killing someone for religion is a good idea. Mormonism is not that way, so that's a good thing, because I had that extreme Mormon mindset. Do you know what I mean?
I've read a few things that you maybe have talked about. You've talked about what you label as radical Mormonism. What do you mean by that?
I just think that I took everything so when we say a fundamentalist, when I talked about the fundamentalist Mormons, they read the scripture for exactly what it is and then they live by it. So polygamy's in there, so they're doing polygamy. When a fundamentalist Muslim reads the Quran and he sees a scripture about taking the head off of an infidel, a lot of non-fundamental Islamic people will say, well, we don't do that. We're peaceful. We're not going to do that. But the fundamentalists will say, no, absolutely, we need to do that. So I was radical in the same way. I was a fundamentalist Mormon. So whatever the scripture said, I absolutely just believed it as it was written. And so thankfully, the Mormon scriptures don't really, other than the Old Testament, they don't really call for violence, which, is the Old Testament is universal to all the Christian churches pretty much, and is obviously the cornerstone or the actual foundation of Judaism. So thankfully, that wasn't part of my mentality, but all the New Testament stuff, Book of Mormon stuff, Pearl of Great Christ, Doctrine and Covenants, I was very fundamental. I never drank coffee till I fell away from the church. I never drank alcohol till I fell away from the church. I never smoked cigarettes or anything like that. I still don't smoke cigarettes, but I've tried them. Just, see what the hubbub is about. Don't like them. So, I took everything very serious. The church believes in something called the word of wisdom, where you don't smoke or drink coffee or whatever. Anything the church said was gospel to me. So if the prophet would have got a new revelation and said, well, we're going to go to war with the feds over something, or if the prophet said, whatever he said, man, I was his man. I was his guy. I was fine with it. I believed 100%. So that's pretty extreme. When you could be controlled by the leader of your church, to be told to go jump off a bridge and you do it, that's some serious power. I would say that's extreme. I would say that's an extremist view that I held. Not that ever happened. None of that would probably happen in a church like Mormonism, but that's the extent of my radicalization within the church, if that makes sense. When I grew up, I wanted to be a bodyguard for the prophet. I became a cop. And I think part of that was I got a fascination with some of the old church stuff. Like, for example, my grandfather's great-grandfather was one of the founders of the Mormon Church. Joseph Smith originally had 12 apostles. He called 12 people to help him build the church. And one of them was a guy named Parley P. Pratt. And I'm a direct descendant of his. And Parley P. Pratt is regarded by the Mormon Church as the greatest missionary of the modern day. So in the New Testament, you have like the Apostle Paul, great missionary. Since the Mormon Church believes that it is literally the church that Jesus Christ set up, but that church fell out of grace with God, and that Joseph Smith set it back up exactly as it was. Parley P. Pratt is like a modern day Paul as far as missionary work goes. And so I had a fascination growing up with Parley P. Pratt and the 12 Apostles and Joseph Smith. And there was a guy, Joseph Smith had a bodyguard named, what's his name? He was from originally Porter Rockwell. It was his bodyguard. And Porter Rockwell is actually in Western. If you read much about Western gunfighting or Western outlaw gunfight, gunslinger, he's probably got a higher body count than any. I think it's arguable that he might have the highest body count of people he's killed in the West. And his killing he's done for Mormonism. Joseph Smith made a lot of enemies, and that was his man. So when I was a kid, I kind of idolized all these guys, and I thought, maybe when I grow up, I'll go. The prophet has bodyguards. Maybe I could do that for a living. My whole life was just pointed towards service of the church, prophet, on and on. And so I think I was pretty extreme. I do.
No more Roach on Florida TV.